Madam President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Thank you, Madam President. I would ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. I rise, as so many of us have of late, to talk about the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. This invasion, as we know, started on February the 24th, and it's now, I guess, in its 21st or 22nd day. At the time of the invasion, I think it was the day after or 2 days after, I was reading in a newspaper a reference to one resident of Ukraine who said the following about the onset of the hostilities by Vladimir Putin in Russia. He said, quote, "It was the worst sunrise in my life," unquote. I can't even begin to imagine what that individual in Ukraine or tens of thousands of families were feeling on that day, and hundreds of thousands throughout the country, millions even. This attack, which is ongoing, was both unprovoked and unjustified. It's an attack on a sovereign nation by a murderous dictator who has no regard for human life and no regard for the rules-based international order. I think a lot of people knew that before the invasion, but now it's abundantly clear to the world of what Vladimir Putin's intentions are and what his practices are when it comes to attacking a sovereign nation. The New York Times told us last Friday, March the 11th, about Putin, and I'm quoting here from the New York Times, quote, "He has demonstrated in the past," and they made reference in this story to his actions in Syria as well as Chechnya, "He's demonstrated in the past a willingness not only to bomb heavily populated areas indiscriminately, but also to use civilian casualties as leverage against his enemies," unquote. Use civilian casualties as leverage. That's the dictator that the people of Ukraine are dealing with right now. And I think it's clear from the reporting, and so many Americans have read the stories and seen the coverage of the bombings. It's clear that he's bombing indiscriminately. It's clear that he and his army, his military, are targeting civilians. All you have to do is look at the list of locations. And the list would be hundreds if we read all of them. But here's just a couple of examples. Maybe the most graphic in the last couple of days was the bombing of a maternity ward. And that footage of a stretcher coming out of that rubble with a pregnant woman who has since died, as did her child. That's an example of that kind of indiscriminate bombing. But in addition to a maternity ward, he's bombed a shoe factory, a psychiatric hospital, apartment buildings, cafes, homes, parking lots near a shopping center, bombing near a kindergarten, bombing of a mosque, bombing, we're told, the most recent number, 34 medical facilities damaged in Ukraine. And that number, of course, will grow. Most recently, just in the last day or so, a supermarket, I think at least 12-story residential tower. And then just today, another reference to just one example of the brutality of Putin. 10 people killed waiting in line for bread in Ukraine. The advisor to the mayor of one of the most besieged cities, Mariupol, said the following. This advisor said, quote, "Humanity has not yet invented a word to describe what Russia is doing to us." I think that says it all. There's no way to describe what's happening. The world has never seen this in recent history. Maybe the closest example would be what happened in Syria, which of course was also paid for and led by the Russian military, Mr. Putin. Despite all that horror and all that bloodshed and all that is to follow, despite all of that grim reminder of the brutality of Mr. Putin, the Ukrainian people have inspired so many of us. When I say us, I don't mean just people voting members of Congress or people throughout the country. They've inspired people the world over. I've never seen anything in my lifetime that equates to the inspiration that they've generated. Their courage, raw physical courage of the people, of the military, and all the contributions they're making to their country. Their resolute determination to protect their freedom, to protect their families, to protect their nation, and really, when you think about it in a larger sense, to protect democracy itself, because that is really very much on the line in Ukraine. The Ukrainian people's stubborn refusal to be intimidated by a ruthless autocrat and his military has inspired so many people every single day. Just saw another example this morning. Women who had left Ukraine with their children to bring their children to safety, coming back into Ukraine to join the fight, or in some cases, I guess, to rejoin the fight. Women putting their lives at risk for their country. This morning, we had the honor, I know the presiding officer and all of us, the members of Congress, had the honor to listen to President Zelensky's address to the Congress, and I know the nation saw it as well. His address this morning was also inspiring, every bit as inspiring as that engendered by his people. But his address was also a call to action for us to do more. We've got to do more. And we've got to provide additional support. President Zelensky thanked our president, President Biden, and the American people for all the support that we've provided, especially in the last couple of weeks since the invasion began, but also before that. And President Biden responded just 2 or 3 hours later when he announced even more military assistance or security assistance, which, if you add up just that part of the support, just since he took office, is now at about $2 billion. That doesn't include other support like humanitarian support. But here's just a quick list of what that security assistance is. And I'll just itemize a few. This isn't exhaustive, but it's just some examples. Stinger anti-aircraft systems. We've provided many hundreds of them, and now we're providing a lot more than that. The Javelin anti-armor systems that have had such success against the Russian military, Russian tanks. Helicopters, patrol boats, grenade launchers, guns and ammunition, grenades, mortar and artillery rounds, secure communications, military medical equipment, on and on and on. And as I mentioned, the President responded specifically today by announcing that the United States will add $800 million just on security assistance, bringing that total, as I said, to $2 billion since he began his administration. It was noteworthy that two of the component parts of that, the Stinger systems and the Javelins, both are being used with great skill by the Ukrainian fighters. Those numbers, the increase in those numbers, is not just a few hundred. In both cases, it's either double or tripling what we've already done. And we'll do more. We'll continue to do more. The Congress has passed a spending bill just a couple of days ago, the end of last week, and the President signed it this week, which allowed that $800 million to be available. So that's the good news. More money for weapons and other security assistance. More money for humanitarian support. That number is growing all the time because of the need that the Ukrainian people have. The sanctions, the crushing, unprecedented sanctions that already are having effect. I had a briefing today just on that topic of the impact of the sanctions. and it is substantial, and it will only grow as time goes by. We'll have more time later to talk about that. And of course, the contribution as well, all of these are contributions of not just our government, but our people. The American people made these contributions of military assistance and humanitarian support and our ability to impose sanctions with our allies, with our NATO partners. But at the same time, what gets lost sometimes in the discussion about Ukraine is the intelligence support we've provided. All kinds of offices throughout our intelligence community providing actionable intelligence, or intelligence that the Ukrainians can use as they fight the battle, fight the war. That is probably incalculable in terms of the advantage it's given on the battlefield and beyond. So that bears emphasis as well. I think one area of positive development in the last couple of months is the unity, not just the unity of NATO, which has never been stronger, probably never stronger since the 1960s or even more so, but the unity here at home, unity in the Senate, unity in the House, unity throughout the country to support the people of Ukraine, the people, but also to support the military. I have to say, though, as much as we have that unity with our NATO partners and here in the Congress, there are voices here in Washington and around the country that are not as unified. We know that voices like our former president and his continued approval of Putin's, quote, genius, unquote. Why would you ever say that about a murderous dictator? He's not a genius. He's, I believe, a war criminal. But that kind of language and that kind of support for Putin, at least by way of laudatory words, has tarnished that unity, has undermined that unity here at home and around the world. But it's not enough to break that unity. I just hope that Republican members of Congress, when someone in their party, especially a leader of their party, or a member of Congress or any other Republican official, I hope that when they say things about Vladimir Putin that is positive or in any way supportive, that they would call it out and condemn it. When you're supporting the people of Ukraine at a time of war, you have to use every tool in your toolbox. Military assistance, diplomacy, sanctions, humanitarian support, but also your words as leaders. And we should be condemning any American leader who supports or says positive things about Mr. Putin. So I hope the Republican members of Congress who have stood up and been very supportive of the Ukrainian people in this fight would also call out members of their party and condemn such statements. Because that didn't happen in July of 2018 when the former president, in my judgment, this is my view of it, was genuflecting before Vladimir Putin on the world stage. In Helsinki, Finland, in probably what I believe is maybe the worst day for an American president on the world stage ever, when he took the side of Mr. Putin, a murderous dictator, over the determinations made by our intelligence community about the previous election. That was a low moment for America, for our democracy, and for our country. So we now have, I think, very clearly a choice. It's not a choice of 3 or 4 options or 5 options. There are only 2. Only 2 options here. You can choose Mr. Putin or choose Mr. Zelensky. You can choose a dictator who has no regard for human life and all of the enablers around him, or you can choose the president who's standing up for freedom, Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. It's really a simple choice. It's the choice between the incarnation of evil or the personification of freedom. That's the choice. There's not a third option here. Every American has to make this choice, but especially members of Congress, elected officials. That's part of our job. Got to make a choice, and it's very simple. The good news is Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, House and Senate, the two branches of government have made a choice, and the American people have made a choice. They've made a choice for freedom, to support that personification of freedom by supporting Mr. Zelensky and his government in this war, by supporting the Ukrainian people who are literally putting their lives on the line for freedom itself. Mr. President, I'll conclude with these thoughts. Like our Constitution that we turn to for both not just guidance and inspiration, but we turn to remind ourselves of our duty, so too are the people of Ukraine turning to their Constitution for that guidance and that inspiration and that call to action. Here's what that Constitution says in pertinent part, and it sounds very familiar. It says, and I quote, the people are the bearers of sovereignty and the only sources of power in Ukraine. To affirm and ensure human rights and freedoms is the main duty of the state, unquote. That's what the Ukrainian Constitution says. A mandate that freedom must be the goal in the work of the state. And while are they doing that now? President Zelensky and his government and the people of Ukraine are standing up for freedom. When we are at our best here at home, we do the same. We have a great anthem for our nation, Oh Beautiful, and you know the rest of that great anthem. One of the verses of that great anthem says, Oh beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years. That the dream of a patriot isn't just to stand up in the moment and fight, that patriot is standing up for freedom and fighting and willing to put their lives on the line, or his or her life on the line, for freedom because they're seeing beyond the years. They're standing up for freedom, not just for themselves and their families and their nation, but for the future of that nation. That's what the people of Ukraine are doing right now. And that's why we have to continue to support them in that great fight. So I think most Americans have already made the choice. We just have to back them up and stand for freedom. Not to stand for the incarnation of evil, Mr. Putin and his government right now, but to stand for the personification of freedom. We saw that this morning with President Zelensky. Mr. President, I will yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President.